So tell me about who you are, your role, and where you work.
My name's Yasmin. I am the COO and head of product at Stormforge. I've been at Stormforge for a handful of years now. Prior to that, I was at Puppet for a while, so I've been in the infrastructure automation space most of my career, and now I'm just doing it in Kubernetes. So it's been a lot of fun.
We want to take a closer look at some of the topics that come up in our podcast. And one of the topics is over provisioning. So, one of our guests, Alexander, he wrote an article about over provisioning. What strategies have you found to be effective in controlling over provisioning in large Kubernetes clusters?
Yeah, so one of the pieces in that article I really agreed with was he said that increasing your HBA target utilization as a general rule is a good first step. And what I see is a lot of people use something like 60% for their target utilization. And that's literally you're telling Kubernetes to waste 40% of your CPU. So do you actually know why most people set it to 60?
No, why is that?
It's because that's the example in the Kubernetes docs. So everywhere I go, people have set their target utilization to 60%. I'll ask them, and like rarely do people have a good answer of why they did it. Um, I'll usually point out, they're like, oh, it's in the docs, that's probably why. And they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, right. Or they're like, honestly, it was set on other workloads, so that's what we set it to. And so for people that haven't really kind of embarked on any type of optimization and they have low cluster utilization, usually just raising the target utilization is low hanging fruit. Especially most of the time, people are pretty generous with their limits and their requests and their limits. And it's an easy way to optimize of just increasing that target utilization, and then it'll increase your CPU utilization pretty easily. And honestly, like pretty safely too. Because you have set those generous limits, then you can burst above your request as needed. And then beyond like setting your target utilization, I think it comes down to the type of app. So for static apps, it's easy enough to look at a Grafana dashboard, see, okay, what does the application actually need, and make sure whatever buffer you're adding, because everyone's adding a buffer, isn't leaving too much waste. So just being diligent about that. And then for dynamic apps that kind of fluctuate during the day or maybe have more downtime on the weekends, that's a little bit trickier. Then it's a mix of determining, like, okay, what's the right setting for the right time, but then also having the automation to making sure you're changing those settings at the right time. So knowing, okay, I need less resources on the weekends, for example, figuring out what those usage patterns are, and then deploying the changes to your requests and limits so that you can lower your requests when the workloads don't need it.
To take that a little bit further, because you're just bringing, shedding some light on the fact that a lot of people are doing this because of reasons they may not even know, or that, because it's in the docs and just kind of following along. You talked to a lot of people about optimization. What's the number one mistake that you see people making when it comes to that? Because I mean, who doesn't want to optimize? But what are people getting wrong about that?
Yeah, honestly, it's the thing I mentioned earlier of when I'm like, how do you set your request? They're like, well, the application had it, and that's why I use it for this app. And I'm like, oh, but that's a different app. Does it have the same profile? Does it have the same resource needs? And they're like, well, I copied the template, and that's what I used. So honestly, that's the biggest thing I see. People, everyone is in a rush to kind of quickly get things out, of course, and resource management kind of comes towards the very end usually. And so, in an effort to get the application deployed, meet the needs of the business, people kind of skip that step of, okay, let me actually just think of what the resource needs are for this workload.
Now, another thing that came up in the interview that we did with Alexander was about governance and requests and limits. He stated that being conservative on requests can be painful in large clusters. How do you approach resource allocation in environments with many uncontrolled workloads?
Yeah, so we see this a lot too, and the approach kind of adds up very quickly. So I mentioned the safety buffer. Everyone's setting those safety buffers. There's just making sure that there's a little bit of give on all their workloads, and sure, that works fine when it's just a small amount of workloads, but on the larger clusters, it adds up and becomes a big problem. And I think part of this is because people are looking at their own app. And when it's your own app, being a little over provisioned is fine. It's just a little. And you have that safety buffer. But then when you are on the other end and you're looking at the entire cluster, all of those little safety buffers start adding up, and your utilization is getting into the teens or even the single digits. Um, And even worse, we talked about like what is the biggest challenge here. Those safety buffers people are adding to are guesses or just copy paste from previous applications. So you're adding guesses to something that probably already has enough of a buffer. So again, just the waste adds up, and you need the governance. This is easier said than done. I think platform teams are usually the ones that get kind of put in the seat that they're like, okay, we want to put governance in place, but the incentives don't necessarily match with the developers, because like, you're a developer, why would you not add a safety margin? You're the one that's going to get the call in the middle of the night because your app ran out of resources, it started ooming, whatever happens. And so those incentives don't match. The platform teams want to have the more efficient cluster. They're getting pushed to keep the cost down, improve the utilization, but app teams want to drive uptime or kind of make sure they're maintaining reliability. And these things are often perceived at being at odds with one another. Like if you're going to reduce the resources, then all of a sudden something bad's going to happen, even though probably you could reduce the resources and everything's good. And when push comes to shove, people always choose reliability over cost improvements, at least what we've seen. When they can't make, like, I would biasly say that you can make that decision because you don't have to choose between the two if you use software. But when people are kind of doing more of the DIY, then they have to choose. And before I worked at Stormforge, I worked at Puppet, as I mentioned, and lived and breathed the DevOps problem. This is the same thing. It's just applied to a new set of technologies. You need the alignment between the teams. You need to break down those silos. And I think it's just most effective to do this governance through software, because then you get that unbiased third party empowering both sides. And I've seen this kind of go two ways. There's the shame back approach. And that's literally like platform engineers use reports and visibility to really shame people into, hey, you have a lot of resource waste. These are costing a lot. There's a lot of waste in either CPU or memory. You need to do something about it. And then the other approach is more the empowerment, self-service approach, where the platform teams offer up the automation and tooling to, one, reduce the toil for the developers. It's a lot easier to kind of convince people to do something when it's really easy for them to do it. And then the second part, just handling this for them in a self-service manner. And I mean, we strongly believe that it's important for developers to have that input with the platform engineering teams. If you want to do real resource optimization, you need the buy-in of both sides. You're not going to kind of force this down anyone's throat. So that's what, like, I think I could honestly compare this to the Puppet days, where like you went to do basic config management. You can't force that down anyone's throat. Like, you have to bring the people together via software. And so both approaches I've seen work. Depends on the culture of the organization, the shame approach or the empowerment approach. The latter's a little better, I'd say. But in either case, it's using software to do the governance, not having kind of people do that.
It's interesting, right? Using software so it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind, and avoiding that tendency to fall into conflicts where there might be doubts around ownership. And then, as you also mentioned too, the importance of getting buy-in. If you don't have that, there's going to be automatic resistance. And so much of what we're talking about when it comes down to, as much as it's technological, it's about change management. I think those are great insights to keep in mind. You know, you did mention, talking about resources, resource management. Our guest, Alexandra, also expressed that having an automated mechanism is better than enforcing processes. What automation tools or approaches do you recommend for managing Kubernetes resources?
So I've been trying to not be so biased in this. Obviously, I think I would say that from my point of view, the only answer here is automation, and I would recommend our product, Optimize Live from Stormforge. But I think this same rule can apply to anything that even isn't cost optimization. Having automated enforcement, using a tool for it to handle the toil, is always going to be better than humans, because like you mentioned, the processes are just not scalable, and you don't want the blame game, he said, she said, all of that. You want tooling to solve this. And because I'm in product, I get to talk to a lot of users, and we talk a lot about how they've either attempted to solve this problem using automation tools, have already solved it, or are thinking about solving the problem. So everyone at the different stages. And the answer is always a automation tool is the easiest, but in some cases people go the DIY approach of creating their own automation internally, right? It doesn't always have to be something you purchase. And where there are some challenges and more the DIY approach is it's not very hard to set CPU memory, right? It's like 2 settings. If you're counting requests and limits, that's 4 settings. And fine for a few workloads, you can go ahead and do that. But for 1,000 workloads, what if those are changing every day? That's where, like, okay, you need an automation approach. And because I work at Stormforge, I'd argue you need machine learning and automation. So machine learning to kind of come up with what the setting is, making sure it's the right setting for the application for that specific workload at that right time, and then the automation to actually go out and change that setting. And then you got to layer on things that make your life easier. So we talked about kind of like getting the buy-in for the developers. You want to have those constraints. So like the automation tool should have the ability to set constraints and say, I never want any of these applications to have a CPU set less than 100 millicore, for example. Or like this app, I always want to be have my requests equal to my limits. You need that flexibility in the automation tool because it needs to be easy. It needs to be easy to interact with, easy to use, and easy to deploy out. So when I say that, I mean like working with tools like Argo. Everyone's using some type of GitOps tool. The automation tool you use must just work. Or when you roll things out, have a little bit of intelligence to say like, okay, I don't want to just roll out big changes all across my environment all at once. Larger changes, I want to roll out slowly. Smaller changes, maybe I want to make sure they're at least big enough that it's worth that kind of churn in my environment. Because when you're using an automated tool, like that's all hitting your API and making those changes. So you want to make sure that's doing it in a scaled out approach. And so as much as I would say like our tool is great for this, I think that I'd strongly recommend a tool that helps you not focus on managing Kubernetes resources, that does the job for you, like what you mentioned. It should be boring. Like, do the thing for me, let me focus on everything else. That's why, no matter what it is, cost optimization, something else, you want an automation tool that just kind of makes this stuff boring and does it behind the scenes so you don't have to think about it. Obviously, I could talk about our product and the things that are needed all day, but if you're looking to start simple, go with the open source VPA. It's a great place to start. It has some limitations that, are on the docs where it doesn't work well with the HPA, and maybe it doesn't have that advanced automation, but the pieces are there to get started. And I think especially for static workloads, great place to start. Helps, take off I looked at a Grafana dashboard and then I manually made some changes. Start with the VPA. And then once things start to go more, your environment becomes dynamic. Maybe you have some HBA-based workloads. Maybe you have some Java workloads that have specific resource requirements. Your developers may have like certain needs. You want that flexibility in a tool like Stormforge, I'd argue. But you want that flexibility in an automation tool that can kind of handle all of that at scale for you.
Now, bonus question. The role of cloud providers when it comes to optimization, are they getting in the way? Are they enabling? What's been your experience? Any recommendations for folks out there that might be wrestling with this question?
Yeah, it's funny. We partner with AWS because of Carpenter, and we love Carpenter. You'll see us do talks on it because we do pod optimization. They do Node, and you need the two to actually kind of cut down on your resources. And people often are like, and I can just use the AWS example. I won't speak for the other ones, but they're like, okay, well, why does AWS want me to reduce my resources? Like, why are they investing in Carpenter? Why are they even partnering with you all? And I think they understand that as people grow, like they want to make sure they're putting their investments in the right things. So maybe you are cutting down on your like Kubernetes infrastructure costs, but then you can repurpose that towards something more innovative, maybe some like ML AI workloads that you're looking to innovate on. And I think AWS sees that and wants to be the platform for people to do all of their like application deployments and management and everything and have the answers and not be the one that you have to spend the most amount of money on just your infrastructure, right? Like spend it on the things that matter.
Well, Yasmin, thank you very much for sharing your insights today. Looking forward to connecting with you directly in KubeCon. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait.